All right. We want to thank you today for joining us for this episode of Real People, Real Conversations. And I am Richard Moses with SC Thrive. And I am just so pleased to have Dr. Jane Kelly, who is the state's Assistant Epidemiologist for South Carolina. She works with DHEC, and we're just so glad to have her. Dr. Kelly, we want to welcome you to join us today as we discuss the COVID vaccine and everything, hopefully COVID-19, to help bring some people up to speed on what's going on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Well, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and get started.
You bet.
Dr. Kelly, let me ask you this. Who actually can get the vaccine right now?
It's a huge number of people who could get the vaccine right now. So anybody age 55 and older, anyone who has one of the following medical conditions. I'm going to name a bunch of different medical conditions, and that's why I say it's a huge number of people. Anybody who's got cancer. I don't mean a history of cancer like having breast cancer 10 years ago. I mean cancer right now. Diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, sickle cell disease, or living with HIV/AIDS. There are some other small groups, but it's all on our website. But it's basically if you've got a medical condition and you wonder whether you're eligible to go for a vaccine under phase 1B, you can find that information on our DHEC website. But it's not just age and medical conditions. It's also anyone who is a frontline worker. Now, what do I mean by that?
Great.
I mean frontline, meaning that you don't telework, you're coming to work in person, but that you work in a situation where you're within 6 feet of other people for 15 minutes or more at a time. Because some factories, for example, some of the poultry and meat packing industries, they're just not physically set up to keep workers separate. They're like right on top of each other.
Right,
for people working in grocery stores where they're at the checkout clerk all day long, they're face to face with people. And I know, even in places where there are mask mandates, sometimes they're face to face with people who aren't wearing their masks or aren't wearing them properly. So age 55 and older, people with medical conditions, people who are frontline essential workers. And there's some other groups, people who live in congregate settings, meaning that, you live you're living 24/7 with a group of people, which means that you can't distance yourself. And that would be, for example, people in corrections. So yes, both the inmates and the correctional officers, they're in phase 1B. And I want to mention one other group, because it's listed under medical conditions, but I think sometimes people aren't going to think of this as a medical condition. And that's being overweight or obese. Because I know a lot of times people figure, well, I'm big boned, everybody in my family is big, I don't consider myself obese. But there's a real technical definition, and it's called body mass index. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
If you're 5'0", 5 feet tall, and you weigh more than 153 pounds, you're in that category. You are at increased risk of getting severe COVID-19, and we want to get you vaccinated. If you're 5'6", you weigh over 183 pounds, you're in that category. If you're 6 feet tall and weigh more than 221 pounds, you're in that category of increased risk. But that also means that you're in that category to get vaccinated now. And so if you're not sure, you can actually go online to kind of check your height and weight to see if you fall in that category. But I think a lot of people don't realize that that's an extra risk for severe COVID-19 too. We want to make sure we get that message out to people.
Great. Well, let me ask you this. Where can one go right now if they want to set up an appointment?
So we have on our DHEC website something called a Vax Locator. It's a vaccine locator, but it's the URL, the website is VAXLOCATOR, vaxlocator.dhec.sc.gov. So the Vax Locator will give you two things. You can click on a map, so just give you a map of the entire state, and there'll be green dots The green dots are all the places that have been activated for having vaccine. There are also some red squares on there. Those are sites that have met all the requirements for getting vaccine, but we haven't had enough vaccine shipments yet to activate them, so they don't have vaccine yet. But you can look at that and see where, who's got vaccine, where does it lie. But there's another way of doing it. Also, on that same Vax locator, you can type in your zip code, and it'll show you all the locations within a certain distance of you that have vaccine. And then you can go to those and click on those individual sites. Like for me, when I put in my zip code, I get a bunch of Walgreens, Walmart, and some other little like mom and pop pharmacies or local hospital. And so I can go to any of those to look to see if they've got vaccine appointments open. I know that there are also some places that are doing public events where you can just walk in and do on-site reservation, no appointment needed. For example, in the Charleston area, Fetter Health Clinic has been doing an amazing job with doing this, where they have on-site registration. So you don't have to have an email and you don't have to access the internet. You just show up. They put out a flyer, they advertise it, and you just show up. So I would suggest to your viewers to also kind of look for those sorts of events that will be advertised locally. And as we get more vaccine, there'll be more of those events.
Great. Well, what about in all of our work that we do with SC Thrive, we find that transportation is a huge barrier, and that we're finding as well that we have some of the more rural areas that have spotty internet access.
Yes.
What is the best way for them to schedule an appointment?
That is really tough. And what we're working on right now is a system where you would not have to use the internet, where you can call. Now, I know we right now have a vaccine appointment kind of help desk where you can call and they'll help explain the steps to do it, but they won't make you an appointment. Sometimes certain organizations have volunteered to do that. I know some church groups have done that, where they've said, that's all right, come on Sunday and we will help figure this out. But we're also trying to work on a system where you wouldn't even have to do that, where it would be just telephone. You wouldn't have to put in all that information. We're not quite there yet. I know AARP is also working on that to try and help older adults. So it's kind of all a bunch of grassroots things that are popping up around the state. Another thing I want to mention, though, is that let's say some group in your community, maybe it's a community-based organization, maybe it's a church group, maybe it's a sorority, fraternity. If there's a group of people who wants to have a vaccine clinic to help people, like in rural areas, one of the things they can do is they can fill out a form on the DHEC website asking to sponsor a vaccine clinic. And that's in fact on that Vax locator page. So it's got a little button that you can click, want to sponsor a clinic. So you don't have to be yourself, know how to give vaccine or handle the vaccines, handle the needles, that kind of stuff. You're just offering the site and organizing and getting people to come to it.
Are there any minimum number of participants that organization needs to have in order to participate as a site or a sponsor for a particular event?
I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. I know another way of doing it is to contact one of the other providers, like a nearby vaccine provider. Let's say you contact Prisma and ask them, would they be willing to come to your community? Often they will be. I name Prisma on purpose because I know they have mobile units, vaccine units. Yeah, so they might be exactly. I can't speak for them, but I know that is their big effort, their big push is they want to make sure that they are out there in those underserved communities, in rural communities. People don't have transportation. There is no hospital. There is no mom and pop pharmacy right around the corner. So partnering with Prisma may really help.
Well, great. In the current trend, Dr. Kelly, what are you seeing as far as the COVID-19 cases? Are they holding steady? Are you seeing a decrease? What is going on right now?
We are seeing a decrease, thank goodness. But you have to keep in mind, on the other hand, we had a huge surge in January. After the holidays, huge surge.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, our numbers are coming down, and that's great. They've been coming down for 7 or 8 weeks at this point. Number of new cases, hospitalizations, deaths, all trending downwards. However, and my however is I don't want people to, think, oh, we're out of the woods, everything's good, vaccines here, numbers are coming down, we don't need to wear these masks. No, things are coming down, and that's great, but we need to keep on keeping on because number one, our cases are still high. They're coming down, but remember they're coming down from a huge surge in January. But number two, we've got these new variants. And these new variants that are circulating are spread more easily. They're more contagious. So, it's like, it's a little bit more difficult to keep your numbers down when you're dealing with an infection that is more contagious. So this is a good trend. We hope it continues, but I hope people remain vigilant.
Are we finding that the 3 vaccines that are currently available, are they playing a great factor in helping reduce or just being able to fight off the different variants that you just spoke about?
Sure. So far in South Carolina, we've had about almost 1.3 million doses of vaccine gotten to arms. Now, that's not full vaccination, right? For Pfizer and Moderna, you both need 2 shots. So in terms of number who are fully vaccinated in South Carolina, it's closer to about 600,000. So I don't think that vaccine by itself has really had too much of an impact in the decreased number of cases, but it's definitely had an impact in the decreased number of deaths. And here's why. Remember that phase 1A? Phase 1A was workers in healthcare settings, but it was also residents in nursing homes. And that was the biggest mortality group. In South Carolina, oh gosh, it's like 40% of people who died were nursing home residents. So by vaccinating them, that greatly impacts the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths. So vaccine certainly has made a huge difference in terms of hospitalizations and deaths. I think the number of cases coming down is a little bit, maybe it's part vaccination, but I think it's more people have it after the holidays were over. People got back to doing the right thing with masks, distancing, staying out of crowded indoor settings. What worries me is the weather's beautiful today and spring break is coming up.
Yes.
So it worries me that people it's going to be a little bit like the holidays. That does worry me.
Well, all we can do is hope that people continue to do the right thing. Dr. Kelly, what makes the COVID-19 virus so much different than other viruses?
It is quite different. Now, do you remember SARS, the original severe acute respiratory syndrome?
I do.
Back in 2003. There were about 8,000 cases, came out of China. It did spread worldwide. We had cases in the United States. It very closely related. It's SARS-CoV-1. This one now is SARS-CoV-2. They're very closely related genetically, but they differ in a couple of key places. And one of the places where they differ is in what part of your body it affects. So SARS-CoV-1, they both start with your respiratory system. That's how you get sick. You breathe in the virus and it sticks in your respiratory system. But SARS-CoV-1, it caused pneumonia in some people. About 10% of people who caught it died, but it stopped there. It number one, didn't affect all these other organs in your body. It was just lungs. And the other thing is, it wasn't as contagious. That's why they were able to contain it. They did these same measures around masks and quarantine, and it stopped. I mean, it went away. It was contained. What's different about SARS-CoV-2 is 2 things. It's more contagious, and it doesn't just affect your lungs. It can affect your heart, your kidneys, your liver. It causes an inflammation of the blood vessels. So any part of your body that a blood vessel goes to can be affected. So that's the big difference. It was a series of mutations that affect you so that it can affect your blood vessels and all those other organs.
Generally speaking, Dr. Kelly, how do vaccines work?
Vaccines produce kind of a sneak preview. So let me talk just a little bit about how your immune system works. So let's say, you breathe in a germ, and we breathe in germs all the time, right?
That's right.
How come we're not sick all the time? Because we've got an immune system that works. You breathe in a germ, whether that's a bacteria or a virus, your body has certain immune system cells that go immediately to the scene of the crime, that go to your respiratory system. Or let's say you cut yourself, you get a little infection. They pick up the germs, and then they bring them to some of your lymph nodes, your glands. So you know how sometimes if you're sick, you get swollen lymph nodes, like in your neck, you get swollen glands. That's because your immune system is responding. So it's responding by making these extra antibodies, but it's more than antibodies. There's some other cells in the system that is part of your immune response. What happens with a vaccine is by giving a sneak preview of an infection, by giving you just, a little piece of the germ, or give you a weakened germ, your immune system has a chance to respond to that, and then it remembers. There are actually cells that they call memory cells in your immune system. So it remembers what that germ looked like in the vaccine, so that when you're presented with the actual disease, your immune system can respond like that. It doesn't have to wait, swell up your glands, make antibody. It's already all there, set to go.
Well, what makes the COVID-19 vaccine so different? Because I've heard that the Pfizer as well as the Moderna were different technologies.
They are.
What makes those so different?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think this is the wave of the future. I think they're going to be making more and more vaccines like this. So if you think back to the early days of vaccine, the way early smallpox, but even like within our lifetime, polio vaccines. But one of the first ways of making a vaccine was to take the actual germ and weaken it. Then there are a number of different ways you can do that. You can do that with chemicals. You can do that by putting it through what are called cell lines. Doesn't matter. They either weaken it or you outright kill it. But it still has all the proteins there that your body would react to, that your immune system would react to. So, for example, with polio, both the oral polio was the weakened polio virus. They actually gave you the polio virus, but it was weakened. But your body recognized it, so that if you were ever exposed to the real polio virus, your body reacted right away. There's a little bit of a risk with that, though, right? I mean, what if there's a mutation? What if something goes wrong? What if you gave it to somebody who had an immune system problem and didn't know it? Like somebody, nowadays we would worry about, what about someone who had HIV and didn't know it? You'd worry that you'd make them sick. So vaccine manufacturers have been trying to get away from that as much as possible. Boy, the only live virus vaccine I can think of in common use is the yellow fever vaccine that people might get if they travel to countries that have yellow fever. Most vaccines we use nowadays either use just a piece of the virus or bacteria, just one of the proteins, or some other methods. But the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine did a really clever thing. So you and I, our genetic code is something called DNA. We've got DNA in our chromosomes and all our cells. This virus has a related molecule called RNA. And so that's its genetic code. So what the scientists for Pfizer and Moderna did is they took just the gene for one protein that sticks out of the coronavirus. So they didn't even take the whole genetics of the SARS-CoV-2, just one small piece of it, and made it into a vaccine. What that does is that when your immune systems take it up, they'll recognize that one protein, they'll recognize that genetic code, and they'll make that protein and make an immune response to that protein. Now, how come we haven't been doing this for years? Because it's difficult, because the technology just wasn't there. We're talking some really sophisticated molecular biology techniques, talking about genome sequencing. I mean, here, I'll go back in history again. You remember the Human Genome Project? You remember hearing about that? It was in the year
I
2000.
think I vaguely do. Yeah, I vaguely do.
Yeah. The year 2000, this was a big to-do that they announced, oh, we've sequenced the human genome. It took them 13 years, 2.7 billion, that's with a B, dollars, to sequence the human genome, because that's what the technology was then. Today, you can get your genome, your human genome sequenced in a day for under $1,000. And they do that, for example, with women who have breast cancer and they're trying to choose what's the right chemotherapy to give them. They want to look at what genes they have. So we've had like 20 years of huge strides in this whole genetics stuff, this whole genomics sequencing. And so that's why for the first time they were able to make these RNA vaccines specific to this virus, because they had that molecular biology experience. And that's true for infectious disease. I do want to clarify what I'm saying, because they do have some RNA vaccines, not for infectious disease, but they've been using it in cancer, what's called immunotherapy, where you're stimulating your immune system to fight off a cancer. So they've been using this technology for that. It's just this is the first time they've used it for an infection.
So, Dr. Kelly, you're telling me, if I'm hearing you right, that this technology has been around for maybe 2 decades?
Yes and no. Let me explain, because there's a couple of pieces here.
Because let me tell you why I'm asking that. Because I hear so much vaccine reluctance on behalf of people I talk to, and their main thing is they created these vaccines too fast. So therefore, that's where the reluctance comes from.
Oh, I can see that, sure, because we never even heard of this disease. It shows up in January, and we've got a vaccine in less than a year. How is that possible?
Yes.
No, I can see that. Let me put a couple of things in context. Again, remember I mentioned SARS-CoV-1, the original one back in 2003. Well, they started work on a vaccine right then and there. And not just in the United States, all over the world. Everybody was really worried that this was going to spread, become this big pandemic. So, both academicians, academics, colleges and university researchers, vaccine companies, governments, they all started work on creating how can we understand more about this virus? Let's get it genetically sequenced. Let's figure out what's going to be the best target for a vaccine. What's the best way to attack this virus? They started all of that work 17 years ago. But then when SARS-CoV-1 was contained, because it's not as contagious, the vaccine companies stopped work on making a vaccine, but all the other science research continued. They continued trying to understand, how does this virus spread? How did it go from animals to humans? Understand about its mutations. Just like, I mentioned the human genome sequence. They did the exact sequencing. And what that means is learning what are the exact letters in the genetic code of that virus, so that you know exactly molecule by molecule what it looks like, not just under the microscope, but literally molecule by molecule. So we have 17 years worth of research on SARS-CoV-1. SARS-CoV-2 comes along, and it's 96% the same in that sequence as SARS-CoV-1. So literally, scientists could look at that sequence, and I mean it literally like a series of letters. They would look at them side by side to figure out, okay, what's different about this SARS-CoV-2? Oh, okay, this piece is different. This is where we need to go to make a vaccine. That information was released by China on January 10th. By January 11th, companies around the world were working on trying to make vaccine. And I mean hundreds of companies. Everybody was trying to work on this project. Some of the earliest vaccine studies were in animals in February. They had vaccine ready to put in monkeys and in rodents in February of 2020, because they had all that. The longest step in making a vaccine is all that basic science research, and that had already been done. So they were ready to pounce on doing it in animals. So they had it in animal studies in February. And the animal studies are really for safety. You don't want to give it to a healthy human volunteer unless you're 100% sure there's no weird effects in monkeys. So they had that information by March, and they started, Pfizer and Moderna both started their what are called phase 1 studies. That's where you take about 100 people, young, healthy volunteers, no medical problems. You give them the vaccine just to make sure that there's not something strange that's different in humans. And if it looks safe in that, then they go on to a bigger group where they're trying to see, do you need a booster dose? Well, if you do, how far apart do the shots need to be? But then only after you got all that do you go into the really big studies where you get tens of thousands of people. But I'll tell you, this is the other thing that's different. Your viewers and people you're talking to are absolutely right. It feels like, I thought it took years to make a vaccine. How come this vaccine, we made it in less than a year? 2 reasons. It wasn't really made in less than a year. You got to count in that 17 years of basic science research first. But how come it went so quickly once they went in from the animal studies to the human studies? You got to understand how these vaccine companies, their business case, their human studies are expensive, right? You have to pay people transportation, you have to pay doctors to examine them, you have to pay for the blood work. And some of this blood work is, sophisticated stuff, analyzing antibody levels. So they're expensive. So vaccine companies, they don't want to do that unless they know they've got a sure thing. So what they'll do is they'll do a study, small study, maybe 300 people, phase 3 study. When I say phase 3, that's because that's the time we're going to try and study it in many, many people. And we're going to include people who have other medical conditions, make sure it's safe for them. If you have diabetes, heart disease, HIV, make sure it's safe for you. They also want to look at lots of ages, make sure it's safe to give to people 65, 75, 85 years of age. So they do it in small steps. Do 300 people, look at the data and say, oh, okay, this looks good. Let's do another 300 people. They do another 300 people and they say, oh, this looks good. Let's do another 3. They take it over years because they don't want to spend the money up front unless they know they've got a sure thing. What was different about this is that governments, not just in the US, governments around the world, because they're worried about this pandemic, governments around the world, philanthropic organizations, places that donate money to make the world a better place, they said to these companies, go ahead and recruit as many people as you can right now. Don't do these things by baby steps. Do it all right now. We promise we will invest. Sometimes they gave money to these companies right up front. Other times it was sort of like a promise. I promise I'll buy 100 million doses of your vaccine. And so what companies were able to do is recruit a lot of people right away. For Pfizer and Moderna, for example, they each enrolled more than 30,000 people within 2 months in the summer, which was, that's what's unheard of, to get that many people joining in a study within 2 months. I think that's amazing. I don't know how they managed to do that. But I think it's really important that people understand no steps were skipped. It's just that instead of taking 5 years to study it in 30,000 people, they got 30,000 people right from the start, right from the get-go. And we're able to, at this point, we've got like more than 6 months of information, more than 8 months of information on some of those people. So in terms of long-term side effects, we have a lot of information about that. So I understand that idea of it seems like it was made too fast. It sure does seem that way until you think about those two things, that, all the research that went on before and that whole business case business of usually they drag out the phase 3 studies because they're expensive. Instead, they just jumped in and did them. Just think it's an amazing thing that they did.
To the consumer, Dr. Kelly, what would be, when we look at the Moderna, we look at the Pfizer, and we look at the Johnson & Johnson, what would be the main differences in those three to the consumer, to that person going into that pharmacy maybe having a choice of getting one of the three, what would that main, or to the hospital for that matter, what would the main difference be or differences?
So the main differences are Pfizer and Moderna, you need 2 shots. Johnson & Johnson, 1 and you're done. So Pfizer, you get 1 shot and then you get your second shot 3 weeks later. Moderna, you get a shot, get your second shot 4 weeks later. It's okay if it's a little bit later than that, if the appointment time doesn't have to be exactly match up. But you don't want to get it earlier than 3 weeks for Pfizer or 4 weeks for Moderna. Johnson & Johnson, though, the way they studied it as a single dose vaccine. That was always their goal, to try and get it to be a single dose vaccine. And it is highly effective. So you've got full immunity 28 days after you've got that single dose vaccine. For Pfizer and Moderna, you don't get your full immunity until 2 weeks after the second shot. So it's a little longer before it kicks in. But all 3 of these vaccines are excellent. I mean, they're highly effective in protecting you against serious disease, hospitalization, death. I mean, they're all highly effective vaccines. So, I hear people sometimes kind of shopping around to try and get one brand or another. And that just concerns me. That just worries me. But I will add one other thing. And that is, most of the people who get vaccinated have some symptoms. And I just think we need to say that up front, that they get some symptoms after they're vaccinated so that they're not surprised. Now, what symptoms? Boy, that really varies. Some people, they get the shot, it's no big deal. My husband got his vaccine just recently, and he said the next day his arm was sore, he felt tired all over, but he took Tylenol twice that day, and then it went away, and he was okay. So I've had friends who have said they got the vaccine, that was no big deal. I know some other people, though, their symptoms were bad enough, especially after the second dose of Pfizer and Moderna, that they had to take a day off from work, that they were just basically hanging out in bed all day. I mean, the good news is it doesn't last forever. And, I'd rather be miserable for one day than be miserable with COVID for weeks or longer. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the symptoms are milder. It looks like the symptoms are milder. So that might be one other difference to the consumer.
Now, Dr. Kelly, you just mentioned that your husband had soreness of his arm in the application site.
Yes.
Now, I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, that's why I'm coming to you with this, that you kind of want to stay away from Motrin or Tylenol before you get the vaccine. Is there any truth to that? Because that can have an effect on your immune response.
Yeah, that is true. I'm glad to hear you ask that question. The reason you get those symptoms of soreness, fatigue, achy all over is because your immune system is responding. If you take ibuprofen, Motrin, before you go and get vaccinated, it could, at least in theory, decrease some of your immune response. So our recommendation is don't take Tylenol or ibuprofen ahead of time before you're vaccinated. Because remember, when the symptoms don't usually start right there that first day. That maybe your arm's a little sore because you just got a shot, but the symptoms start the second day, the day after. So if it's the day after and you're starting to feel achy all over, go ahead. You take your ibuprofen. You shouldn't be miserable. Or you can take Tylenol. Don't be miserable. But don't take it ahead of time. You might not even need it, and you don't want to block your immune system from responding.
Great. Now, you spoke earlier about the variants. What are we seeing in South Carolina right now? Are they starting to spike? Are we starting to see them, kept at bay as well?
I wouldn't say spike, but they are here. And so here's the deal with these variants. So all viruses mutate. Now, that word mutate or mutant, mutation, sounds like a horrible monster. It sounds really scary. Mutations mean just basically that you're changing some of the proteins around a little bit, changing some of the molecules in that genetic sequence. A lot of mutations don't do anything. They're just random and they don't have any effect at all. The 2 variants that we know are present in South Carolina are the British variant and the South African variant. All right, so what is the deal with them? The deal is that the mutation it had, that they each have, make them spread more easily. They're more contagious. And that's a scary thing, because if it's more contagious, then we're going to have more cases. If you have more cases, you risk having more deaths. So that's the worrisome thing, that they could spread more easily. We have in South Carolina identified, I do have those numbers. It's 23 new cases of the British variant and 43 cases of the South African variant. Now that's out of, how many thousands and thousands of cases. So it's a small number. They are here. The reason it's a concern is just that they can spread more easily. So that's why now it's still important. It's more important now than ever to wear a mask, keep your distance, all that kind of stuff until we get vaccinated, because the vaccines will work for these variants.
As of starting last week, Dr. Keller, we started to see a lot of state governments start to bring down those mask mandates. So as that starts to happen, what else can we do to help stop the spread of COVID-19? And you mentioned earlier you're a little concerned about spring break getting ready to start, and us taking our foot off the gas pedal. What else can we do to help stop the spread of COVID in light of the fact that mandates are starting to come down?
Yeah, the mandates coming down does worry me. I mean, it doesn't have to be mandated for people to do the right thing. I worry that people are going to they take that as a signal that they can let down their guard, that it's safe, that fact that if it's no longer the law that you have to wear a mask, then must mean that it's not important anymore. But it is still very important. If these variants are more contagious and we're slacking on wearing masks, we are going to see a spike in cases. I mean, we've got this, decreasing trend that's been going on for weeks, in number of cases. That's terrific. But it could turn around just like last July. Remember last July?
Oh, yeah.
Especially South Carolina was doing really well, right? We, in the spring and early summer, we had low number of cases. And part of that is because nice weather, people are outdoors more than indoors. People were worried about this, taking it seriously. But then we had a big spike after 4th of July. And it's directly related to what people were doing for the July weekend. Same thing after the holidays. So, even though states are removing those mask mandates, I gotta feel like it's a little premature to do that. It worries me, but people can still do the right thing, even if there's no mandate to do the right thing.
Great. Over here, I'm in Florence, Dr. Kelly, and I think over here in our district and as well as other districts throughout the state, you're having a call for our children to return to school on a 5-day per week basis instead of having a blended type schedule or an alternative type schedule. What kind of precautions can parents take to help prepare not only themselves but their children for that 5-day per week school that many are calling for?
Sure. And I know these are boring messages. It's like the same thing over and over about wear your mask, keep your distance. Some schools are using plexiglass to try and add a little additional barrier between kids, having them, eat at their desks, for example, or as the weather gets nicer, that maybe they can eat outside, or instead of doing all classroom things indoors, maybe some things could be done outdoors, because ventilation is important. Outdoors is always better than indoors for preventing the spread of a respiratory disease. But I think schools have done a remarkable job in keeping those students safe. That they have made engineering changes, physical changes in the school, with installing different ventilation systems, with the investing in plexiglass and cleaning different surfaces. And I think kids have been pretty cooperative. Everybody's worried about how are we going to keep the masks on these fidgety second graders, or how are you going to keep masks on those 12th graders who have their own opinions?
Yeah.
By and large, they've done pretty well. I know we have had some outbreaks that were, school associated, but they were more associated with the after school activities, sports events, or other gatherings, kids getting together outside of school for, a party or a dance, some other event. So, going back to school, getting kids, especially, the elementary school children back to school, I know is so important for developmental reasons, that there are like critical periods in your brain's development for learning, not just facts or information, but social skills. Learning, certain arithmetic tasks, but also learning, sitting still and being aware of others and, concentrating and delayed gratification. All that kind of stuff gets learned in school as well. So it's critical to get kids back in that in-person school to learn those skills. And I think it's been proven again, it can be done safely.
Are there any studies on the horizon dealing with our youth 18 and below on testing any of these vaccines? Because it doesn't appear to affect them. Like I said, it does not appear to affect them like it does people 18 and older.
Yeah. The biggest risk factor for severe disease is age. Far and away, it's age. And people under age 50, most of them have, mild to moderate disease. And once you start talking about 20 and under, then really, yes, there are rare cases of kids in that age group who have gotten, this weird syndrome, this multi-inflammatory syndrome. There's this rare condition that is serious disease, but it is rare. Far and away, they get mild or they get no symptoms, in fact. And so there's certainly research going into understanding more about the immune system, what's going on with that kids are protected like that. Are there lessons learned that we can then apply to older adults? But I know they are also developing vaccine for younger adolescents. Right now, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines are approved for kids age 18 and older. Pfizer is approved for age 16 and older. Pfizer and Moderna are both right now studying it in kids who are 12 through 15. So I think by this summer, it's a good chance that we will have vaccine for kids down to age 12. But in terms of I think you were asking a question about, it seems like that age group, they don't get much in the way of symptoms. And that's true. They don't. The problem with that, the people who get the severe disease, that remember I talked about blood vessel inflammation, as you get older, your blood vessels generally get stiffer. They may have some other processes going on, where you get hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, there are some other things, but also your immune system responds differently. And some of the people who get the severe COVID have a hyper immune reaction. It's like an imbalanced over immune reaction. And kids don't, young adults and kids don't seem to get that, except rarely. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
You did a great, that answered it to a T. I got like one last question for you.
Sure.
And that question is, and I think a lot of people want to know this, as far as getting a booster in the fall. Is that something that has been studied, or right now, is it known?
So of course it's not completely known, but we have some general indicators. We know that these vaccines remember I mentioned Pfizer, Moderna, they started their studies back in June. So we've got data on people, 8 months out who were started in those phase 3 studies. And what that shows is that immunity is still high among those groups. So that's good. So it looks like we've got something that is durable immunity. It'll last a long time. How long is long? Is this going to be like an annual shot like the flu shot? Or is this like the tetanus shot where you just need a booster every 10 years? We don't know that yet. I mean, only time will tell. But the fact that we are seeing that immunity seems to last a long time, as far as we know thus far, that's really good news. The other question, though, is about these variants. Now, right now, the vaccines we have work against the variants. They will prevent severe disease, hospitalization, death from these variants. But what if more new variants show up? You know, what if there are more mutations and we get some other variant that maybe vaccines don't work as well against? Well, here's the magic part about that. Remember, going back to the very beginning of our discussion, we're talking about RNA and the way they made these vaccines, and it's different because what they do is they take the exact genetic code and they take a piece of that code, the gene. So if there is a mutation that affects that gene, those vaccine manufacturers can go in and literally change out the letters in that gene, change out the molecules called nucleotides. They can change out those nucleotides to match the variant. That might be a booster. And but will we need that booster? Right now, those variants are not taken off like wildfire. They're here, but they're not taken off like wildfire. So if we can get enough people vaccinated before variants start to spread, we might not need to have a booster in the fall. And will we need a booster every year? Only time's going to tell for that.
Okay, great. Dr. Kelly, we just thank you for taking your time out of your day and imparting this information on us. We got a lot to digest, and hopefully our viewers learned a little something today. If you don't mind sharing that website information again, we'd deeply appreciate it.
For the vaccine?
For the vaccine and even the DHEC website.
So I'm going to do two things while I'm talking to you. I just typed into Google Vax Locator SC, and it brought me right there. So, you know, if you forget when I give you this URL, you just remember that you can just type in Vax, V-A-X, Locator SC, and it'll take you there. So the URL is Vax Locator. Again, that's V-A-X, Locator .dhec, DHEC .sc.gov, G-O-V.
Is there any other information you would like to, any kind of words of wisdom, parting words of wisdom you would like to share with us?
I just sure would like to understand more about the reasons people are vaccine hesitant. I mean, we just talked about some like cognitive reasons, you know, things that people didn't have the facts. Oh, I didn't know about these 17 years. Oh, I didn't understand about phase 3 studies, and they weren't sped up. It's just that they were overlapping. Instead of doing just 100 people at a time, we just did all 10,000 people all at once. So, okay, those are facts. So sometimes people just need more information because they need more facts. Other times, though, it's not about facts. It's about emotions. Yes. It's about fear. It's about mistrust. I don't trust the government. I don't trust big pharma, these vaccine companies. I don't trust the healthcare system. And there are a lot of people who have good reason not to have trust in those systems because those systems have harmed them in the past. Yeah. So I just want to put that out up front. I know that that is true, and those are good reasons for people to be hesitant. But then I have to ask people, okay, how do you deal with fear? Try and find out what is it you're worried about, and then find out how you need to answer that. For example, people are worried about symptoms. They're worried about, well, I don't know, I just heard I'm going to have mild to moderate symptoms after I get the vaccine. Right now we got more than 1.3 million people in South Carolina have had at least a single dose of the vaccine. So you probably know somebody in your family and friends who's had the vaccine. Talk to them. Find out what was their experience. Why did they get vaccinated? What tip finally made the decision for them that they decided to get vaccinated? Find out from them, what made a difference. I think sometimes people are vaccine hesitant because They're worried about, well, not enough research has been done. Just like this is kind of a flip side of it happened too fast. It's also, well, not enough, we don't have enough information yet. Well, more than 90 million people in the United States have been vaccinated so far. So, and no serious side effects have come out from that yet. It's like, how many people do you need before you'll feel comfortable? But also, I know there are other fears of just fear of the unknown, fear of making a commitment. It's hard for some people to go in and make that appointment because they feel like they're committing to a decision that they're still uncertain about. Well, there are other ways of dealing with that. Go to one of these vaccine events, where they're going to do a mass event. Go and you don't have to sign up. You don't have to commit right then and there. Go and just talk to folks and see what's going on, so that you get the answers that you need, the information that you need, so that you feel that you can make a decision. Each of us has to make a decision. It's your personal decision, whether you want to get vaccinated, and you weigh the pros and the cons, the benefits and the risks. Just like if you took an airplane or when you drive to the store, there's a risk-benefit ratio there. To not get vaccinated is a decision too. You have to look at what's your personal risk of getting COVID-19, and if you got it, how serious it might be. That depends on age, medical conditions, where you work. And it's not just about you. It's like, who do you live with? What about your parents, your grandparents? That they're more at increased risk also. Because I've heard people talk about they got vaccinated. I spoke the other day to a woman who's a community health worker. And she was also saying she's vaccine hesitant for lots of reasons I just mentioned. And she shared with me that her sister has sickle cell disease. And she thought, gosh, if I got COVID and gave it to her, and she would have a far worse course of it. So she wanted to get vaccinated to help stop the spread because she had a personal reason. She was worried about her sister. So, each of us has to make our own personal judgment. But I hope that your viewers will think think really deep down, okay, what are the things that make me say, I want to wait and see? What do you need to see? And maybe you just need to talk to, a lot of people don't trust healthcare systems, but they trust their own personal doctor or healthcare provider. Talk to them. Ask them what they think of all of this. And talk to somebody who did get vaccinated. See what their experience was.
People, those are words of wisdom from Dr. Jane Kelly. Dr. Kelly, we do appreciate you coming again. We want to thank you for joining us for Real People, Real Conversations. Again, my name is Richard Moses. I am the Chief Community Relations Officer for SC Thrive. You can go to our website at www.scthrive.org. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, once again. You guys have a great weekend.